You ever find yourself standing there, knuckles white, on the controls of a machine, knowing you're about to get dragged into something bigger than whatever you came out to do that morning? That's where I was sitting in the cab of my old yellow excavator, sweat pooling under my collar, engine idling down to a grumpy cough when I heard her voice slicing through the North Carolina air like a police siren. "He's destroying the lake. Send someone now." That was Karen Whitmore Pine Lake's self-appointed queen president of the Lakeview Homeowners Association, making sure the world heard her. I watched her Mercedes pull up just as the blue and red lights started strobing across my half-built foundation. She'd actually called 911 on me for digging a hole on my own land. Yeah, that happened. If you've ever had to deal with a neighbor who thinks every square foot around them is their own little fiefdom, drop a comment. I know I'm not alone here. The excavator's engine finally sputtered and died, leaving me there in a silence so heavy I could hear the gravel crunching under two police officers' boots as they approached. I stayed in the seat hands in plain sight. 20 years on job sites teaches you not to make sudden moves, especially when some rookie is itching to do things by the book. The older cop looked exhausted, ready to be home. The younger one scanned the place like I might pull out a bazooka. "Ben Harrison," he called, tone right between "we're friends" and "you're about to get cuffed." I climbed down, slow boots hitting the mud, hands out where everyone could see. "That's me. We got a call about illegal construction and environmental destruction in progress. Want to explain what's going on here." But Karen wasn't about to let me answer. She strode up, silver hair pulled back in some fancy twist gray vest, crisp and expensive phone already out and camera pointed. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. Mr. Harrison's excavating far too close to the water line. Look, he's already torn up the natural vegetation buffer. The runoff could destroy our lake's ecosystem." She gestured with one hand, delicate and manicured, the other steady on her phone, ready to capture any hint of violence or outrage for her next HOA newsletter. You could tell just from the way she stood that she'd run this show 100 times before. The older officer, Johnson, I saw from his badge, asked for my permits. "Do you have documentation for this work?" "All of it." I popped open my truck and handed over a folder thick with county stamps. Building permit, environmental impact assessment, septic approval, shoreline development permit, signed, sealed, and delivered. Johnson looked through them, face unreadable, while his partner circled the site with a flashlight, examining the string lines I'd run out the day before. "Mrs. Whitmore Johnson said at last, these permits look to be in order, all approved by the county." Karen didn't flinch. She just pivoted. "Officer Johnson, your daughter's in my Jennifer's class, isn't she? You know how seriously we take environmental protection in this community." It wasn't a threat, but it was a little nudge to remind him that out here everyone's connected and she pulls the strings. "The county permits don't tell the whole story," she continued, slipping into her educate the children voice. "Our HOA covenants measure from the historical high water mark. That's 35 feet minimum. Mr. Harrison's at 25. My surveyor measured 35 from the current water line," I said, already seeing where this was going. She gave me a pitying smile. "Different measurement points, I'm afraid." The 1997 Water Protection Act gives HOAs legal precedence in designated watershed areas. Pine Lake was designated in '98. She glanced at the cops. "I've got the documentation in my car if you'd like to review it. No one wants a legal battle after the fact." The younger cop looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Look," I said, "I just want to build a weekend cabin." Pulled every permit, paid every fee, waited months for approvals. If there's a conflict, shouldn't this be handled by the county or in civil court? Karen turned, eyes narrowing. For a second, I saw something almost like respect. My father was the ranger here for 30 years. He always said, "We don't inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." Her voice cracked just a bit. I believed her. For a second. Johnson handed my permits back. I'm going to recommend you halt construction until the HOA sorts this out. Your permits are valid, but continuing could complicate things. Karen's victory was in her posture, just the tiniest shift in her shoulders. She thought she'd won. "Thank you, officers," she said, her voice silk. "Sorry to disrupt your evening, but I can't ignore a threat to our lake." As they walked away, Karen came over, pulled a business card from her pocket. "No hard feelings, Mr. Harrison. This isn't personal. It's about protecting what can't be replaced." The card was thick, cream-colored, embossed, Karen Whitmore, President, Lakeview Homeowners Association, protecting Pine Lake since '95. "Why don't you come by my house tomorrow at 9? I'll walk you through the specifics, show you how we can get you in compliance. If I didn't, well, the board meets Thursday, and it would be unfortunate if my project got contentious before I'd had a chance to understand the HOA's position." She even reminded me to cover my excavation before the rain for the sake of the lake ecosystem. I watched her taillight slip away between the pines. Alone, I stared out over the water, the same spot where my granddad taught me to fish when I was 7, thinking about the patience it took to sit by that lake all day. My family had come here since before there were even real roads, before Karen or the HOA or any of this. In my phone, I had a photo of the deed from 1922. My great-grandfather didn't just buy a plot, he bought the rights to something much bigger. And here was Karen defending her lake with a ferocity she didn't know was aimed in the wrong direction. She'd been protecting the lake for 26 years, never knowing the real owner had papers locked away in a dusty box. Tomorrow's meeting, I figured, was going to be one for the books. 3 months earlier, the first letter came, heavy cream envelope, handwritten, "No junk mail" logo. Inside it read, "Lakeview Homeowners Association. Dear Mr. Harrison, we understand you've recently purchased property at 47 Shoreline Drive within our beautiful Pine Lake community. It invited me to meet the president, Karen herself. She wanted to help new property owners navigate our guidelines. At the time, I thought it was proactive, friendly even. Most HOAs wait until you mess up." Karen was different. We set the meeting for Thursday at her house. Thursday, March, gray, humid, that weird in-between weather. The drive from Charlotte took 90 minutes, winding up into country and then forest, before the lake appeared ringed by those million-dollar rustic houses. Karen's house, let me tell you, it's the cover shot for every magazine ever. Natural stone-weathered wood, a wall of glass looking out over the water. She answered the door in khakis and a sweater that probably cost more than my boots. "Please come in." "May I call you Ben?" The inside was like a catalog, but lived in, not a speck of dust anywhere. She had a tea set laid out. Not just mugs, china cups, little sandwiches, cookies that probably cost $20 a box. It was surreal, like I'd walked into a Southern Living spread. She already had copies of my building plans. As HOA president, I get duplicates of all construction permits, helps us coordinate with the county. She spread them on the table, complimented my timber frame design, the way I minimized tree removal, genuine praise, and I started to relax. But then she traced her finger along the foundation. "This corner here, it's awfully close to the water. Did you get a survey on the high water mark 35 feet from the current water line?" I told her. She nodded. "The county uses current water. Our covenants use the historical mark. It could move your foundation several feet. Maybe if you shift 5 feet north, still a great view, but totally compliant." She penciled it in light temporary. Just a suggestion, but I've seen projects delayed for less. I appreciated it at the time. "Do you have a contractor lined up?" I told her I was going to general it myself. She handed me cards, excavation, concrete, septic, local names, all in her pocket, all trusted. "Regulations have gotten complex since '97, she said. "Pouring more tea, but it's for good reason. You should have seen the algae blooms in '94 nearly killed the lake." She talked about her father, the ranger, the battles he fought to save Pine Lake. For a moment, the armor dropped. "It's precious. We all want the same thing, to enjoy it without destroying it. I told her my granddad had a cabin here up on the North Shore. Really, what was his name? William Harrison. She looked at me a little longer, then went right back to her script, balancing progress and preservation, offering to review my plans, tabbed copies of every covenant. Driving home, I felt grateful. This was the best HOA president I could have hoped for. Right? I called Tom Bradley, the excavator, set things up for spring. What I didn't see then, what took me months to understand, was how every piece of advice, just a suggestion, had steered me exactly where she wanted. And how she'd gotten copies of my plans before the county ever stamped them. So you ever have a morning that starts with blueprints and coffee and ends with a certified letter landing on your doorstep like a live grenade? That was me. Monday in May, hands still dirty from swinging a hammer, watching the postal truck rumble away. Tom Bradley's crew was hammering away on the joists cabin, rising like the skeleton of a long-awaited dream. We were 40% done right on schedule, and for the first time in months, I had actually let myself picture finishing. Then came that letter-heavy envelope, Lakeview HOA logo up top. My stomach dropped even before I opened it. Inside, it was all official language and legalese, but the message was simple: emergency stop work order. By unanimous emergency vote of the HOA board, all construction at 47 Shoreline Drive must cease immediately pending review of new covenant amendments about shoreline development. Fines of $500 a day and/or legal action if I didn't comply. Effective immediately. Signed and notarized, Karen Whitmore. Dated 3 days ago. 3 days while I'd been in Charlotte picking out kitchen cabinets, they'd been rewriting the rules. Tom must have seen something in my face. "You look like someone shot your dog." I handed him the letter. He read it twice, mouth twisting tighter each time. "They can't do this, Ben. Permits are solid. Everything's legal. Apparently they can." I told him to send the crew home, paid everyone for the day. He spit in the dirt, cussing under his breath. 20 years he'd worked this lake, never seen anything like it. An hour later, Karen's Mercedes glided up. She stepped out, coat buttoned against the warm morning face, the picture of regret. "Ben, I tried to call your cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I just held up the stop work order, not trusting myself to say anything polite." She sat down beside me on a sawhorse, graceful as ever, almost like she belonged there. "I know this is a shock." I argued against the timing, but the board felt we had no choice. New watershed protection requirements came down last month, 50 feet minimum from the mean high water mark for all new construction. County's behind, but our legal counsel says we have to act now. I walked the site, eyeballing the distance 50 feet. Would put my cabin back in the trees. She kept her voice gentle. "It's terrible. 3 other property owners are affected too." That's when it hit me. She already knew who'd be caught up in this. I stared at her, searching for a crack, but all I saw was perfect composure. "When we met in March, you said 25 feet was fine if I shifted the foundation. I paid for new surveys, moved everything." She nodded, scrolling her phone, showing me a PDF of the new state law. "These changes supersede everything. See House Bill 4739 passed last month." Thing is, I know construction law. I know how slow real change happens. Laws don't pass in April and upend half-built projects in May. And the HOA can just stop me, even with valid permits. Section 12, subsection 4 of the covenant's compliance with future amendments required for environmental protection. My attorney had shrugged it off at closing. Boilerplate, nothing to worry about. Turns out boilerplate burns just as hot. "What are my options?" I asked, voice tight. She laid them out like a real estate agent listing houses you can't afford. Apply for a variance, 3 weeks at the next board meeting, show compliance with the new 50-foot setback, maybe downsize the cabin, maybe sell. Property values are up, she added. You'd make a profit even as is. And there it was, the first whiff of what this might really be about. I kept my face still, but inside the gears started turning. She assured me I really did argue to grandfather in projects already started. The board was afraid of liability. If we allowed you to continue, the HOA could get sued. She positioned herself as my reluctant ally, shaking her head at the injustice, then handed off the real work to the lawyers. As she drove away, brake lights blinking, I stood in the quiet, half-built site plans in hand and nothing to show for it but a stack of bills and an unfinished dream. That night I called my attorney. He wasn't hopeful. HOA covenants are tough to challenge. Best bet is to work with them for a variance. Sun went down, tools packed away the site already looking abandoned. On my way out, I passed other job sites, concrete trucks mixing, hammers ringing, all closer to the lake than mine. Selective enforcement, anyone. Out of curiosity and maybe stubbornness, I parked near the community center, engine running, and watched Karen's house. Through those wide windows, I could see her on the phone, animated arms waving a different woman than the smooth operator who'd just left my job site. I started recording. If she was playing a game, I wanted my own evidence. When she ended the call, she poured herself a glass of wine, walked to the window, and raised her glass toward the lake. Her lips moved 3 more months. Then she disappeared inside. Back home in Charlotte, sleep didn't come easy. I started reading up on House Bill 4739. The more I dug, the weirder it got. The law covered agricultural runoff, not residential setbacks. The 50-foot requirement, not mandatory. It said HOAs may establish buffers, never shall. The Lakeview HOA hadn't been forced to change the rule they'd chosen to. And they'd chosen to do it at the exact moment when stopping me would cause maximum pain. So that's how it started. Me, a pile of half-built dreams, and Karen Whitmore playing chess with a board I didn't even know existed. A week later, I'd had enough. I spent too much on security cameras, but it was a small price to pay if someone was planning to mess with my materials, or worse. Tom Bradley helped me put them up, one for every angle, foundation, material, storage, access, road, lakeshore. Seems like overkill, he said, but when I told him how much I had tied up in this mess, he just nodded. Can't be too careful. The cameras went live at noon. Not half an hour later, the app on my phone chimed a notification from camera 4. Karen's white Mercedes rolled into frame, slow as always, like she was just passing by. She got out dressed down in jeans and a Pine Lake windbreaker and started picking up trash around my site. I watched her fill a little bag soda can, candy wrapper, nothing dramatic. Then she spotted the lakeshore camera, looked straight at it, lips pressed tight. My phone rang. Ben, I noticed you installed cameras. Very prudent. She pointed out gently that one was aimed at the lake path, common HOA property privacy concerns, you understand. I promised to adjust it, and did. She hung up, dropped the trash in her trunk, and drove away. But I'd seen enough. I ordered 2 more cameras, hidden ones disguised as electrical boxes. If Karen wanted to keep an eye on me, she was going to get watched right back. A pattern started. Every other day, Karen walked the property, picking up trash, writing notes, inspecting, never touching a thing, always watching. And then one night, checking footage over my morning coffee, I saw someone at 2:41 a.m. wandering my access road. The walk was familiar. Karen in the dark, poking around my site from the lake path, not the road. That evening, I decided to do a little investigating myself. Parked at the public boat launch, walked the lake path, found a bench half hidden by landscaping. Karen's house glowed like a ship on the water. Inside, she worked at her desk, surrounded by file boxes. Around 8:30, a black town car arrived. Guy in a suit, briefcase, lawyer written all over him. They huddled over documents for an hour, unfurled a survey map, pointed at spots on the shoreline, discussed intensely. When he left, Karen just stood at the window, staring out over the lake, almost straight at me. I held my breath. Eventually, she closed the blinds. Back home, I started digging. Karen had moved to Pine Lake in '95, the same year the HOA was founded. Her late husband, a developer now dead, left her well off. HOA records showed she'd been part of 47 disputes. 47. In nearly every one, the property was eventually sold to the same LLC Shoreline Holdings, registered to a Charlotte P.O. box. The more I dug, the more familiar names I found. 12 properties, all bought cheap after some kind of violation, then rented or resold at a profit. Shoreline Holdings is managing member Karen Whitmore. I sat back staring at my screen. This wasn't about protecting the lake. It was about using the HOA to drive out owners, force a sale, and flip the land. That night, my phone buzzed a new alert. There she was at 3:17 a.m. at the edge of my property, looking up at the camera, holding up 3 fingers. 3 months, she'd said. 2.5 left. If this was a game, it was time I started playing for keeps. I don't know if you've ever sat in a folding chair at a community center staring down a row of HOA board members with a room full of neighbors behind you, but if you haven't, let me just say it'll make your palms sweat like a courtroom cross-exam. That's exactly where I found myself on the first Thursday in June, 30 minutes early, scoping out the crowd for allies and enemies. Tom Bradley nursed a coffee by the window, the Johnsons hovered by the cookies, and old Mrs. Carter from the bait shop was front row stubborn as ever. The room filled up quick. Word was out that this was going to be more than the usual spat about mailbox paint colors. Karen entered at exactly 6:30, flanked by her hand-picked board. She was dressed for war in a sharp blue suit, hair pulled back, her whole presence radiating control and neighborly concern in one package. She worked the room, shaking hands, remembering names, smiling her politician's smile, and when she finally reached me, she paused just long enough to let me know she saw right through me. "Ben, glad you could make it. Hope we can address your concerns tonight." "Looking forward to it," I said, voice steady, not quite matching her smile. By 7 o'clock, the room was packed. Karen gavelled the meeting to order, running through minutes and treasurer's report with the kind of precision that says she's done this 100 times. Then she got to new business, the emergency shoreline amendment. She clicked a remote and projected old photos onto the wall, algae-choked water from the 70s, dead fish in the 80s, headlines from the 90s declaring Pine Lake unfit. She spun a story about her father, the old ranger, fighting to save the lake, standing up to developers going broke for the sake of clean water. She was damn good. Even I felt a pang of sympathy before reminding myself she was using all that pain and legacy to push through rules that had nothing to do with conservation and everything to do with control. When the state passed new watershed protections, she said the board acted immediately to avoid another disaster. These changes were necessary. But we're here to find solutions. The Johnsons spoke first, reasonable folks asking for a variance. Karen nodded, took notes, promised to review their revised plans. Then it was my turn. I stood up slow, feeling 200 eyes on me. "My name's Ben Harrison. I own 47 Shoreline Drive." Karen gave me a warm nod. "We're here to listen, Mr. Harrison." I laid it all out. How Karen had helped with my plans. How I'd followed every suggestion, hired local contractors, spent over 300 grand building a cabin just the way she told me to, only to be hit with a stop work order and a new rule that made my foundation worthless. I'm not against environmental protection. I grew up coming here. My grandfather taught me to fish in this lake. But why couldn't projects already started get a grandfather clause? Why is it always the homeowner who pays when the rules change overnight? A board member muttered about liability. Karen cut him off and looked right at me. "What would you propose, Mr. Harrison? How do we balance your investment with the community's responsibility to the lake?" I took a breath, kept my voice calm. Let me keep building under the rules that existed when I pulled my permits. If the board's worried, I'll add runoff controls, plant buffer vegetation, whatever it takes. But moving the whole cabin isn't reasonable. That's not protection, that's punishment. Karen pounced. "If we let you, what does that say to the next person? That rules only matter until someone objects. What message does it send?" I shot back, when the HOA can change the rules retroactively. when no one knows if compliance today will be a violation tomorrow. You could feel the room shifting, restless neighbors glancing at each other, some nodding, some frowning. Karen stood, walked to the front of the platform. "May I share something personal?" I nodded. She told a story about how my grandfather once sold that very property, not to the highest bidder, a hotel developer who would have destroyed the shoreline, but to a young couple who promised to keep it wild. He could have made a fortune, but he protected the lake. That's the legacy I'm trying to honor. She was brilliant, honestly. She turned my own family's history into a case against me, made me feel like the villain in my own story. I sat down hard, stunned. The meeting moved on. People left quietly, some sympathetic, some judgmental. I stared at the blank screen, wondering if I'd just lost the only real shot I had. That's when Mrs. Carter shuffled over. "Walk with me," she said. Outside, she lowered herself onto a bench. "Karen's story about your granddad is true, but not the whole truth. He didn't sell out of nobility. He sold because he got a better long-term offer. Ask yourself, why'd he keep those papers hidden? Why didn't he ever tell you what you really owned?" She gave me a look, part challenge, part warning, then hobbled away, leaving me with more questions than answers. That was the spark. Next morning, I drove to the county historical library. Old brick, musty air, and boxes of records. With the librarian's help, I dug through dusty deeds and maps until I found what I was looking for, the original 1922 deed. Turns out my great-grandfather hadn't just bought a lot. He bought shoreline rights to nearly the entire lake. 47 acres, 100 feet inland, with development and access rights that trumped anything the HOA had ever written. Attached was a covenant these rights couldn't be sold to an organization or corporation, only passed to family or sold to an individual. And any development along the shore required Harrison Family Trust approval. My hands shook as I copied every page. This changed everything. For a week, I didn't tell a soul. I hired a property lawyer from Raleigh, checked every angle, traced the chain of title, confirmed the trust's power. The HOA's own documents admitted that pre-existing rights took priority, but no one had ever thought to dig this deep. I researched all 212 homes on the lake, most built after the HOA was founded, all technically in violation. The legal fallout could be massive. But I didn't want to tear down a community, I just wanted my cabin. So I drafted a careful letter, no threats, no wild demands. Just a statement of rights. The Harrison Family Trust would grant easements to every existing homeowner for $1 a year, legitimizing their property so long as the HOA left me alone and acknowledged my exemption from their shoreline rules. I mailed it to Karen's house via my lawyer. 3 hours later, my phone rang. "Mr. Harrison, I think we should talk." "Agreed. My property or yours? My home, 3 o'clock. I spent the next hour reviewing every document twice. When I arrived, the black town car was there. Karen's lawyer, Robert Sinclair, sat at the table, my deed copies laid out in front of him. "This is quite a discovery," Karen said, voice flat. "If authentic," Sinclair cut in. "It's authentic," he confirmed, a bit sour. Karen looked at me, weighing her next move. "What do you want Mr. Harrison to build my cabin with my original permits? And to leave the other homeowners in peace?" She hesitated. "You realize this could call into question every house on the lake?" "I do. That's why I'm not pushing for retroactive payments. I just want what's fair." I slid over a draft agreement. The trust would grant blanket easements to all existing homeowners. HOA would leave my property alone. Karen read it twice, then looked at me. "Why?" "Because my grandfather loved this lake. He wouldn't have wanted me to use those rights as a weapon, but he wouldn't want me bullied off my own land either." For a moment, the room was quiet. Karen stood, turned to the window. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Harrison. I let my emotions get the better of me. I wanted to protect the lake, but I crossed the line." I nodded. "So did I, digging into your business. But now we can find a way forward." She smiled, tired but sincere. "There was one last thing. Shoreline Holdings, I said quietly. She froze, caught off guard. It started as a way to save troubled properties, she admitted. But I lost track. Control took over. You tried to force me out for one last purchase? She nodded. I wanted to turn your land into a park. Name it after my father. I was retiring next year. You could have just asked. Would you have sold? No, I said, but we might have compromised. In the end, we did. I'd build my cabin, but after I died, the Shoreline would go to a conservation trust with her father's name on it. I left her house that day feeling like maybe we'd both found a way out. But if you think it ended there, well, you don't know HOAs. If you've never had to square off against an HOA in court, especially one run by someone like Karen Whitmore, consider yourself lucky. Our handshake agreement didn't last a month before the rest of the board caught wind of what we'd done. They freaked out about liability, started whispering about Karen's side deals, and suddenly everything stalled. Lawyers got involved, rumors ran wild, and it all ended up in front of an administrative judge at the county courthouse, a place with too much marble, too much beige, and not enough air. I walked in that morning with my attorney, David Renworth, who carried boxes full of copies, maps, exhibits, enough paperwork to fill a dump truck. Karen was there too, hair tighter than ever, flanked by her lawyer, and two young associates with briefcases and tired eyes. The place was packed. Neighbors, reporters, board members, even Mrs. Carter in the backhands, folded over her cane eyes, sharp as a hawk. The judge, Helen Chambers, was maybe in her early 50s, no nonsense, the type who's seen it all and doesn't care about your excuses. She took her seat, called us to order, and let the lawyers make their opening pitches. Sinclair, representing the HOA, started off all polished and responsible. We are the stewards of Pine Lake, protecting a fragile ecosystem from reckless development, acting swiftly to safeguard our community. David, my lawyer, kept it simple. Property rights, pre-existing covenants overreach by the HOA. We have the documents, Your Honor. Karen took the stand first. She talked about algae blooms, her father's sacrifices, her duty to the lake, and the new state rules. She made it sound like everything she did was for the greater good, but when David cross-examined, cracks showed. Miss Whitmore, you testified about the security cameras. When were they installed? Who approved them? Did they capture private property, including Mr. Harrison's construction site? She tried to dance around the answers, but the paper trail caught up with her, her signature, her board, her initiative. Then came the kicker. David queued up footage from the HOA's own cameras. There I was, construction site 2:43 a.m., time-stamped, grainy, but clear enough to see a figure walk across my property, flashlight sweeping, pausing to take pictures. Miss Whitmore, is this you? He asked. She hesitated, jaw tight. Yes, I was checking for environmental violations after the rain. The room buzzed, a mix of disbelief, amusement, and a little bit of fear. David pressed on. So you entered private property at night without notice, using footage from cameras you installed? Sinclair objected, but the judge waved him off. It was obvious this was more than stewardship. It was surveillance. I took the stand next. I told my story straight, how I'd followed every rule, pulled every permit, documented every step, even tried to work with the HOA. I explained why I'd installed my own cameras after all the mysterious visits it felt necessary. I described the sleepless nights, the worry, the sense of being watched. And then I produced the 1922 deed, the trust, the covenant. Judge Chambers read it herself, section by section, in front of everyone. The real turning point was Mrs. Carter. She shuffled to the witness stand, voice steady, memory sharp. William Harrison's father bought those shoreline rights in 1922. Everyone knew. After he died, the HOA assumed the rights had been sold. They never checked. She looked at Karen. You did good for the lake, but you forgot you're supposed to work for the people, not rule them. Arguments went back and forth for hours. Liability, privacy, environmental risk, legacy, the board's emergency vote, Karen's secret meetings with her lawyer, Shoreline Holdings, buying up troubled properties. But by the time Judge Chambers called a recess, the tide had shifted. When she returned, she didn't mince words. The Harrison Family Trust shoreline rights predate and supersede HOA authority. The stop work order is invalid. Mr. Harrison is free to complete construction. The HOA's cameras that capture private property must be removed. Ms. Whitmore, your trespassing and surveillance were an abuse of power and a violation of state law. Damages awarded to Mr. Harrison, $50,000. She looked right at the board. Homeowners associations are not governments. They exist to serve, not to dominate. This court retains jurisdiction. Any further harassment will be punished. Outside, reporters tried to grab a comment, but I slipped away. Karen stood by her car, smaller somehow, her armor gone. Our eyes met, no anger, just exhaustion and maybe relief. Sometimes losing is a kind of freedom too. I drove back to Pine Lake knowing I could finally finish my cabin. The next morning, Tom Bradley and his crew returned. Hammering, laughing music playing my granddad's dream was alive again. But the victory was bittersweet. Karen was right about one thing: the lake still needed protecting, just not by fear or secret schemes. By trust. By neighbors actually talking to each other. 6 months passed. Karen pleaded down to probation and community service. Her spotless record, her years of volunteer work weighed in her favor. But the real punishment: she lost everything she'd built: her presidency, her hold on the community, her reputation. We sat together in Sinclair's law office, signing the final papers. The 212 homeowners would pay $1 a year to the Harrison Family Trust for shoreline access. Symbolic, but legally sound. Karen's name went on the list with everyone else's. I slid another document over. A conservation agreement. When I die, 15 acres of shoreline become a nature preserve named for William Harrison and James Whitmore, for the men who actually loved this lake. Karen tried to speak, but tears got in the way. She signed anyway. I drove her home one last time past the porch where she'd once planned my downfall. The cabin was finished timber frame, glowing in the sun porch swing, waiting lake, stretching out calm and endless. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Your grandfather would be proud." I nodded. Yours too, if he could see the trust instead of the control. She looked out over the water, her hands gripping the porch rail. 3 months, she whispered. That night I held up 3 fingers. I meant 3 months since my father died, 3 months before I was supposed to win the battle he lost. I thought if I could save this place by any means, I'd finally prove I was strong enough. She shook her head. Instead, I became what he fought against. "You still have time to be something else," I said. "I'm leaving Pine Lake. My sister runs an environmental nonprofit in Asheville. She says I can help maybe start at the bottom, learn what real stewardship looks like. This place needs healing, and it can't happen with me here." I walked her to her door, silence stretching between us. "If you'd known about the shoreline rights from the start, would you have used them?" she asked. "Probably," I admitted, "and I would have bulldozed any hope of actually fixing what was broken here. Obstacles teach you something if you're willing to listen." She handed me an old photograph, my grandfather and her father side by side on the lake fishing rods. In-hand smiles real and wide. They were friends once before the fights, before the stories got twisted. I watched her disappear inside her life packed into boxes. "Second chances, Karen," I called, "for both of us." She glanced back, eyes shining. "For all of us, if we choose them." And that's how it ended. The lake still stretches out quiet at dusk. My cabin stands just where I planned, porch swing creaking in the wind. Sometimes I sit with that old photograph, remembering what it cost to win and what it means to let go. Neighbors wave when they pass. The new HOA board meets, but now they listen first and regulate second. Karen's gone. But I hear from her now and then, postcards from Asheville, stories about teaching kids to respect rivers and trees, not just with rules, but with care. I guess the lake really does remember us long after we're gone. And in the end, maybe the only thing you can really control is whether you choose to protect something out of love or out of fear. The loon calls across the water at night, echoing into darkness, reminding me what my grandfather always said. We don't inherit this land, we borrow it from our children. Yeah, that happened. And if you're still listening, drop a comment. Tell me about your own battles, your own second chances. because sometimes the best way to protect a place is to trust somebody else to love it too. The days slipped by November air, sharpening with every sunrise frost edging the grass and the last yellow leaves clinging to the big maples along Shoreline Drive. Each morning I woke up to a world that felt a little lighter, a little more honest than before. Maybe not entirely free from the old ghosts, but at least no longer pretending they didn't exist. The cabin was finally mine timber frame, warm and steady, the porch swing groaning as I eased into it after sunset. The lake was glassy most evenings now, except when the wind picked up and chased ripples across to the far shore, all silver and indigo under the first stars. It felt like a place where things could finally rest, old wounds, old grudges, even old dreams. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about Karen some nights. What she lost, what she learned, how quickly all that authority she carried melted away under the wrong kind of pressure. You don't get to choose what other people remember about you. Not really. Some folks around here still talk about her with resentment. Others with a kind of strange nostalgia, like she was a force of nature that kept us all on our toes. Maybe that's true. I find myself wishing her well wherever she is, starting over with a suitcase full of regrets, and maybe if she's lucky, a few lessons too. The community changed, you know. The new board started off cautious meetings longer than ever. Everyone a little jumpy about stepping on toes. But after a while, people started showing up just to listen, to share stories sometimes, just to talk about fish or weather or which path needed gravel. Folks started swapping tools again, watching each other's pets showing up to paint the old playground at the community center instead of fighting over dues. The surveillance cameras came down one by one. Privacy felt like a gift instead of a battleground. Mrs. Carter's bait shop even saw a little revival kids riding their bikes down on Saturday mornings, buying gummy worms and cans of Coke, gossiping about who caught what, whose dog got loose this week. Some evenings I'd walk the path around the lake, past the homes I used to see as fortresses, little islands with no trespassing signs and clipped hedges, people hiding behind rules and resentment. Now there's laughter coming off the decks, neighbors waving me up for a beer, sometimes telling their own stories about Karen, how she used to show up with cookies and a tape measure, or how she once shooed a family of raccoons off the Johnson's dock at 3 a.m. Not all her battles were about control. Sometimes she really was just trying to protect what she loved, even if she lost sight of where to draw the line. I found myself thinking about legacy, what it really means. What my grandfather tried to teach me every summer, sitting quiet in the canoe at dawn, lines in the water, steam rising off his coffee mug, sun just starting to cut through the mist. He'd always say, "Ben, you take care of the lake, it'll take care of you." But you start thinking you own it, that's when you lose it. I never really understood until now. Power's not about who signs the checks or who calls the meetings. It's about who shows up, who listens, who fixes what they can and forgives what they can't. The day I signed the conservation agreement, 15 acres along the best stretch of shoreline preserved forever in the names of 2 men who once shared a boat and a laugh before the world turned them into rivals, I felt like something real had finally been set right. It wasn't about beating Karen or the HOA or even the rules. It was about letting go of the idea that winning means someone else has to lose. About making peace with the land and the people who care for it, however imperfectly. One afternoon deep into winter, Karen called from Asheville. Her voice was softer, lighter, almost young again. She said she was teaching kids about rivers and runoff, letting them splash around in waders, building little dams out of rocks and moss. They don't care who owns what, Ben. They just want to see the minnows swim. She told me her health was better, her sleep came easier. I never realized how heavy all that watching, all that worrying really was. Maybe I did more harm than good. I told her we all do sooner or later. But you did a lot of good, too. Don't forget that. Before she hung up, she laughed, the sound echoing with something close to hope. One of the kids called me Lake Grandma the other day. Can you believe it? I could. I wished her well. Afterward, I sat by the water a long time, letting the stillness settle in. I thought about second chances, how we almost never know when they're coming or whether we deserve them. Maybe it's enough just to try again to leave something better behind than what you found. The new HOA board even asked me to come speak at the spring meeting, not as a warning, but as someone with a story worth hearing. I told them what my grandfather told me. Respect the land. Respect each other. Don't let fear or pride turn you into something you wouldn't want your kids to remember. Folks listened, some nodded. A few even wiped away tears. I ended up sitting on a volunteer committee helping draft new guidelines for construction ones that balanced the rules with common sense, that protected the lake without boxing out the people who called it home. Sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason, watching the sun break through after a cold rain, hearing the geese honk their way south, feeling the thud of boots on my own porch. Some evenings I make coffee and take it out to the dock, letting the cold bite at my fingers, watching the moon ripple in the water. The photo Karen gave me sits on the mantel, two old friends in fishing hats frozen in a simpler time. It's a reminder that even after all the fights, all the courtrooms, all the nights, I lay awake wondering if I'd lost everything, there's still beauty to be found if you're willing to look past your own scars. And now sometimes kids come down to fish off my dock. Sometimes they ask about the old days or why I don't have a security camera pointed at every tree. I just smile, hand them a soda, and tell them trust is worth more than any fence. The lake is quieter now, less watched, but more alive than ever. You can hear the loons at night, see the stars without the glare of motion lights. Folks talk, and sometimes they disagree, but they do it face to face, not through anonymous complaints or backroom deals. As winter turns to spring, Pine Lake starts to wake up again. Buds on the dogwoods, frogs chirping, the smell of fresh-cut grass. My story is just one among many, but it's enough. I walk out to the end of the dock, picture my grandfather there, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the water. Maybe I'll never have all the answers, but I finally know what matters. So yeah, if you're listening wherever you are, don't be afraid of starting over, of letting go of old grudges, of handing out second chances, even when they scare you. Sometimes peace doesn't look like victory. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own breath mixing with the wind, the lap of the water, and the echo of a loon calling out across the lake, carrying all our stories into the dark, where they can rest at last. And if you ever find yourself fighting for something you love, remember, you're not alone. Someone's been there before. Someone will come after. The lake keeps going. And maybe, just maybe, it'll remember you kindly.